A little bit of housekeeping before we start. We would love you to use the chats. You can react to speakers whilst they are speaking, and I will also drop a link at the end of the training for you to receive your certificates. So that will come at the end. I'm also just going to quickly drop in the chat here as well the ISN link. So if you haven't yet registered for your ISN membership, you can do that. It's completely free to register, and you can share then with us, being kind of on top of these events as they're coming in, and also potentially share some ideas for future events that we might host. Okay. Okay, so we'll get started now, just like I said, to try and keep on time with everything, and so we can hand over to John at the correct time. So welcome to our latest ISN live event, What is True? The Essential Role of Media Literacy in the School Curriculum. In today's rapidly evolving digital landscape, where platforms like Facebook and X are removing fact checkers and AI deepfakes are on the rise, teaching students to discern trustworthy media has never been more urgent. In this session, our experts will highlight the impact of misinformation, deepfakes, and the distortion of truth that arises from algorithms. They will also provide supportive strategies that can be used to help students navigate the flood of misinformation, identify credible sources, and develop essential critical thinking skills. So we're going to start first of all by handing over to our keynote speaker, John Micton. So John has 30 years of experience in education and media technology, with extensive international work in schools across Africa, Asia, and Europe. Having held various leadership positions, John is also a trainer and course designer for principals and middle leaders. Recipient of the ISC Research Award in both 2021 and 2022, we're so pleased to welcome John.
Thank you very much, Claire, and it's a real privilege to be here. So I just wanted to kind of give an overview of the essential role of media literacy in the school curriculum. And I like to call it recalibrating truth, because everybody now has a different perspective of what is truth. And especially in the political landscape, and as we see the evolution of a very different narrative coming about in many different spaces in the world, I think truth now really has many different meanings. I just want to be very upfront, because we are in a world with AI, so you need to know that the AI images that you're seeing were created by Sora and ChatGPT 4.5, and that I use Perplexity and Elicit.org always to help me with my research and really give me a wider scope to jump into on this topic. So one of the things I think is truth is not something that you just find easily. It's something that you have to navigate now, especially with algorithms and AI shaping what we see online. I think our view of reality is filtered, it's very personalized, and often can feel distorted depending who is looking through what lenses. And I think the changes we need to understand is what's true and what's not. That's really kind of what we're going to explore here. Misinformation is the new normal. I think it's really hard not to be exposed to misinformation with deepfakes, the AI-generated content, and far less attention, as Claire had mentioned, to fact-checking, a real shift. And it's easier than ever to really this false and misleading information to kind of spread. And often, especially in a school context, if you think of many of our students, often they are relying on social media feeds for their information. It's sometimes hard to know what's really real and true. I think what we're seeing, and Marianne Wolf from UCLA uses the term skim reading versus deep reading. I think, and many of us very likely do that, when you get to your phone, you tend to look at the headings and the taglines and very likely don't spend as much time on the article. And often what we see is these headlines and clickbait really promote this idea of skim reading over deep reading, really reducing the opportunities for critical thinking and deeper engagement with information. That is why educators are so critical in this narrative, because we have the capacity to really give the tools and the dispositions and the skills for kids to understand the importance of deep reading. Algorithms today are designed to predict what we want and what we believe. over time, this is really going to shape the type of choices we make, and in some ways limit our independence and influence how we often think about things, often maybe even not realizing it, because if we're always in a bubble where everything we see confirms our beliefs, sometimes it's hard to have perspective. Where the world is we're in a world flooded with curated and sometimes misleading information. And really, for us as educators, we're the anchors. Schools are the anchors, helping to guide students to cross-check sources, the concept of reading laterally, and develop the habits needed to make sense of what is true and not true. So if you think of some media literacy strategies, lateral reading is to really getting kids to look at a variety of trusted sources, leveraging maybe the library, leveraging primary sources. It's about source credibility, really getting students to understand, to look at the about page, author credentials, even looking at the organization's background. The awareness, understanding that some content is AI generated and what might be some visual inconsistencies, and even using some verification tools. And that, of course, is very different in different age groups, and there is kind of a scope and sequence that we need to consider. Deep reading is really where we're talking about rich text to model slow, thoughtful reading, highlighting, questioning, and really going behind the headlines. And this is really so important. Healthy media habits, how are we getting kids and ourselves and educators to get into these habits of fact-checking, understanding time boundaries, and really thinking about our use of social media and our news sources, and really looking for more than one perspective. The critical question is, who created this? What's left out? Who benefits? How do I know it's true? So lateral reading is really some examples using reverse image search to verify photos' origin, check claims using a fact-checking platform like Snoops or NewsGuard, compare AI versus human written text to spot patterns. This can be a really powerful exercise with students. Use news literacy games to slow down and analyze content, and then really set routines for checking multiple resources before sharing. So it's really, how do we build the habits, the knowledge, and the skills in a way that we start at a very young age, children that are maybe 5, 6, 7, and continue that and keep reinforcing it and giving concrete tools and strategies that kids can lean on when they're outside of the school setting. We need to weave media literacy into every subject, if it's math, whatever it might be. So kids and students learn to start questioning and have the capacity and know to pause and analyze and think critically whatever they're studying. It's how we build these lasting habits of awareness in a world full of information that is going to make a difference. And these habits are things that you can't just do one shot. These are things that have to be thoughtfully thought, look at the units of learning, the standards and the curriculum that we're working with, and how do we weave those in that they become part of the daily diet of the learning that we're engaging students to be part of. We're really guides through the fog. Our job isn't just to teach facts, it's really the metacognition. How do we learn to think, and how do we think about thinking? That means teaching to question what we see, verify what we hear, and make sense of the complex media landscape. Unpacking, what does it look like? Getting kids to understand, how do algorithms work? How does social media work? But we can't guide them if we don't build the skills ourselves. I think it's so important. Many of us come, and I can speak to myself, in my education, we never did any of this because that wasn't around. So how am I going to be guaranteed that I have the skill set to support the kids? And that's where professional learning, professional development, lifelong learning becomes so important. And how do we explicitly give the space and time? Because space and time is what we're often short of. And how do we make that not optional, but really something that is required, not only for students, but for educators, and being comfortable not to point the finger and saying you don't know what's going on, but really leverage it as an opportunity to learn and really support these students, and taking the time as a school community and a learning community to make media literacy front and center of what we believe in. The question isn't just what is true, it's how do we help students find truth in a world that's constantly reshaping it for them. Truth is being recalibrated. It's shaped by algorithms, AI. Non-stop content sometimes blurs facts and fiction. We can see that in political landscapes where there's just constant change and things are just happening so fast. Sometimes it's even hard to know what is what and things get blurred. In this landscape, it's students and educators need more than answers. We need media literacy as a compass to question, verify, and think clearly in a world that's really designed to distract us. And this distraction is actually thought out. It's not by coincidence. And there is an agenda. And I think if we think of the idea of free will and independence and agency, and the idea of being able to think and really create our own world, these things become so important. And really, I think we're at a stage where it's non-negotiable. So, on that sober note, I just want to make sure that I have created a resource place where all these different resources and the conversations that I've highlighted in this presentation are available to you. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have anything. I'm based in Switzerland at the International School of Geneva, and you can always reach me through my blog, or also if you're interested, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. So thank you so much, and I look forward to joining the other experts on the panel with some great questions that ISN has shaped for us. So thank you again for being part of this short presentation.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much for sharing, and for those resources as well. So we will make sure that those go out to everybody. So when this recording is then hosted on the ISN platform, you'll be able to access all of those resources also. Okay, so we're now going to hand over to Elliot Newman, who is co-founder of our sponsor, Wellio. I believe Elliot is going to share a little bit more information on Wellio's inception and journey. So I'll hand over to you now, Elliot.
Yeah, no worries. Well, John, thanks so much for that. I think that was brilliant and a really wonderful framing of the problem. I particularly like the part you mentioned about schools being the anchor. That really resonated with me, and I think that's right. But I can also see in the comments here, I don't know who CD is, but I've read the comment in here regarding schools, how that's quite challenging for them to be the anchor still today when things are changing so rapidly, when they are moving. And so I think that's a really good segue into, what Wellio is trying to do and who we are. So I'll share my screen and basically talk a little bit more about that. So let me just jump in here to that there. So, okay, what actually is Wellio? Wellio is a platform that is designed to help schools more easily teach, manage, and track all things well-being, financial literacy, AI, algorithms. And why does it actually exist as a platform? Well, 7 out of 10 leaders around the research that we've conducted across multiple countries still continue to say that student well-being is the biggest challenge facing their school. Now, that's probably a surprise to 0 people on this call, but more and more we're seeing this idea of well-being and what that encapsulates being an enormous challenge for schools. And so why is it such a challenge? What actually is leading that concern? So we've been looking into this for a number of years now, and we see pretty consistently survey data suggests that there are 6 core reasons. And I want to riff off what John said a moment ago, because I think this is going to tie in quite nicely. But basically, the first thing that most schools say is that, hey, I know there's a problem. I can see the problem in front of my eyes, but the content that I've got to teach it is really out of date, and therefore it's not engaging the students. So what do schools do next? They then try and create new content to deal with these topics. But number 2 is that they often just lack the time. They don't have the time. There are to-do lists that never get done. There are a number of things happening in a school every day. The amount of meetings I've been in where a school will say, "Hey, I'm really sorry, students come in and I've got to go," because that's the nature of what it's like in a school. It's really hard to find time to write resources and materials on these topics. But even if you had the time, what most people turn around and say is, "I don't have the expertise." Gone are the days where I'm a science teacher and therefore I teach science. Those days are in the past. What John has just described is an enormous problem around algorithms, deepfakes. What is truth? And what schools are being asked to do is hey, teacher that is maths teacher in year 8, you've got a free period today. Can you go teach these kids about AI? And that teacher is saying, I do not have the expertise to deliver this. And that's really challenging. What comes next then is that even if I've got the expertise, how comfortable am I talking about AI? How comfortable am I talking about financial literacy? The amount of schools I meet with where they say, hey, I don't even have TikTok and Snapchat. How am I meant to go and relate and teach a lesson on TikTok addiction when I don't even know really what that is? But even if you've got all of those things nailed down, the big thing that schools really struggle with is responsiveness. How do I be responsive to the problems when and where they arise? It's really hard for schools to do this. I think this has been most aptly shown in the last sort of 2 months. I don't know if everyone's had this cultural phenomenon through the TV show Adolescence, but it has swept around schools that we work with, whether they're in Sydney, Hong Kong, London, Cairo. This show has had an impact, and schools have said, hey, I want to be able to teach these issues coming out of this. What do I do? I can't respond. I can't pivot. And even if all of those things are done well, schools are saying it's really hard to track knowledge and understanding. How do I know if what I'm teaching is right? How do I know if they've understood it? How do I know if they can apply it? And so this is where Wellio comes in. Essentially, what Wellio is a platform that is designed to support schools with the teaching and learning of these difficult topics. What we have is a library of hundreds of lessons that cover every single topic that you could ever imagine, put together by our team of experts. They are updated every single week, month, term. But in addition to that, we're constantly adding to this library to make sure that you've always got the best quality resources to deal with the core challenges as they occur. In addition to that, the platform inherently in the back end is going to measure and track everything that occurs in the platform. You're able to understand how students have gone on certain lessons, what level of knowledge they've taken away. You're able to launch surveys through the platform to assess what does year 8 know about digital literacy, AI. I'm going to run these lessons now. What do they now know? How have they learned? How have they grown? All of this is a really challenging component of what schools now are being asked to do. And as I mentioned a moment ago, when you've got all those other challenges, just tracking and measuring is kind of not even on the agenda as the school is trying to get across this new content. And then lastly, probably most critically, what we try to do at Wellio is provide content that is hyper engaging. Every lesson is designed to be simple to teach, but highly engaging. What does that mean? We've actually built in games, quizzes, polls. This is a Kahoot-styled quiz. Given the nature of how lessons are updated, we're essentially saying to schools that you will never have a lesson again that is out of date. It will always be on the front lines, cutting edge, making references to cultural phenomenons when and where they're happening around the world. So what does that actually mean? What does that look like? I actually thought I'd just give you an actual demonstration. If I take you over here to the platform, this is what Wellio looks like. This is a demo account. So this is what a teacher's view would look like. Here are all the classes at the school that are being run. And if I come over here, I've got my library where I've got literally hundreds of lessons for every single year level that a school will need, on every single category a school will need. But what I wanted to show you is, in particular, a lesson that we actually launched about 2 months ago about deepfakes and AI. And so when John's explaining that the core problem here is that, everything that John just went through, which is entirely true, what we find is schools will say, okay, I have this problem today, and I'm not an expert on this topic today. Maybe soon, but right now I'm not. And that's where Wellio comes in. We basically put this on the platform and schools can just add this to their teaching with a few clicks of a few buttons. So what does a Wellio lesson look like? Every lesson starts with the goals, measures of success, so that teachers can dive in immediately. And essentially what we've done is we've gone and synced up Wellio with things like TikTok, Instagram Live, YouTube Shorts to go and access really high quality material so that schools don't have to go and do that. The thing that schools will often joke about is spending 3 or 4 hours on YouTube trying to find clips, and that actually makes up a large part of their time. But essentially what this lesson starts with is, just to give you a bit of an idea, starts with actually, this is a pretty realistic deepfake of Morgan Freeman. So the lesson sets the scene always with an engagement piece or an activity. And then what we do is we break into this discussion. But what I wanted to show you primarily is the way that Wellio is sourced and taught. Everything is practical, everything is activity-based, everything is trying to get students to think critically. And this lesson is no different. It starts with a game. We're going to give them 5 deepfakes. Is it a deepfake or is it not? We're going to give them 5 scenarios. Is it a deepfake or not? And can you spot why? So this starts with a video. This is Erling Haaland, a striker for a football club in the UK, Manchester City. This is in fact a deepfake, but students have to watch it, and then on their devices they have to do a quiz, and they actually have to critically assess how they know or whether they know it is a deepfake. And this lesson then continues on with a few other images and videos and things of that nature, and the students actually have to assess this. Now, why does this exist? Again, it's all about getting the students to think critically, but most importantly for the teachers, it's about ensuring that they have something that they can lean on immediately that is of extremely high quality, that's going to start addressing the problems that they're experiencing today. So where is Wellio at around the world? We're currently working with 450 schools globally. We work with schools across Africa, the Middle East, Europe, Asia, and Asia Pacific. And essentially, if there are people on this call today that are looking at this saying, okay, I actually, I'd like to see a little bit more of what these lessons entail, you can easily scan this QR code here. You can also go to our website. And on the website, we basically have an option to create a free preview. It'll give you access to a number of our different lessons that you can simply go in, create an account. You can start exploring them for yourself. A lot of schools then might want to organize a particular meeting to actually have a full trial account at their school so they can actually teach some of these lessons and see how they react with their students in their environment for their communities. So that's available to everybody on this call. More than happy for you people to scan this QR code and give that a go. But by and large, I just kind of wanted to finish by saying that that I think this problem is a really important one for the future. We'll get into that in a moment. I think John did a magnificent job of elucidating the problem. Where we're trying to come in is say, hey, we're here to help you deal with, manage the problem today, so that you don't need to become an expert to start tackling this problem. Thank you for your time, and looking forward to getting into the panel discussion after this.
Thank you so much, Elliot. I think what you're saying now is is really valid. I've written in the chat here that I think one of the issues is that teachers can really feel kind of overwhelmed with the amount of information that they feel that they need to kind of possess, and that they've accurately sourced all of this and that they're up to date. And actually that can be really tricky, especially if you are a teacher who has multiple responsibilities or multiple roles. So I think that Wellio are doing a great job in kind of bringing these really well resourced and researched materials to all teachers. I'm just going to drop the link as well. So if you didn't get hold of that QR code, it will go out afterwards, but I'll just drop the link in the chat as well so that everybody has the link there. Okay. We're now going to jump into our panel discussion. So we've got a few other guests joining us for the panel discussion today. So if I could start, first of all, can I ask Christopher Blackwood and John Dolman, could we start with a quick round of introductions, and then we'll just jump straight into our panel discussion. So if we could start with you first, Christopher, that'd be great.
Hi, everyone. I am Christopher Blackwood. I'm currently head of digital innovation at a school in Dubai called Victory Heights Primary School, where I teach computing, and also try to focus on ensuring that we have a comprehensive online safety curriculum to ensure our children are prepared for any issues that may arise when they're online as well.
Thank you. And John.
Hi, I'm John. I currently teach media in the northeast of England, although it's interesting, I live not very far from Victory Heights, because I was teaching in Dubai and I've taught in Malaysia as well. Former head of department, and I write as the AI English teacher and write and blog about artificial intelligence and its impact on education.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to jump into our first question for the panel discussion. This question is for John Micton. So, with the rise of AI-generated deepfakes and misinformation, what practical tools or frameworks do you recommend for helping pupils verify the authenticity of digital content?
It's a great question. I think really you start with a foundational understanding, kind of giving them, especially for little kids, what is fake. And, if I'm thinking of early years, you could actually have a little play or some interaction. And then, nowadays, there are a lot of altered images, and you can do some comparing and contrasting. And for older kids, you can use news articles. I think it's really important for them to understand that this is out there, and the deep fakes and the misinformation are really things that are within the context that they live in. And I think real world scenarios are so important, and also getting them to start understanding who benefits from this. Why are there deep fakes? Why is there misinformation? And who benefits from it? And you can often just use things within the context of the classroom, where a kid says, oh, I scored 4 goals and they never did. And there are a whole bunch of kids in the room that know that they didn't force goals. And then we talk about that. I think that, especially in primary, it's really important to contextualize it and really get them to start having these critical habits of mind. Triangulating information, as I said in the presentation, is so important. Leveraging your librarian, if you have a librarian. Also getting parents involved, getting kids to understand there's more than one place. Just don't go to YouTube or wherever it might be. I think also engaging with real media is really important. Sometimes we say, oh, we shouldn't show them this, but I think it's really powerful if you can give them examples. And I think it was Elliot was showing us that activity with fake news, and the fake images. There are a lot of great resources out there, like Wellio, there's Common Sense Media, there's the iReporter. So I think really those things are out there, and how do you integrate them? And I think sometimes we are too cautious. Most of our kids have been exposed to AI. Be it Alexa or Siri or the Navsat or Google Home. So they're far more aware of it than sometimes we give them credit. And they also have a lot of thoughts and feelings. I love the fact that I did a survey of my year 2 students, and 60% of them had an Alexa at home. And I said, why do you like Alexa? And one of the girls said, I love Alexa because she's always there. She's always got a nice voice, and she never says no to my answers. And then we talked about, why is that great? And why would your parents maybe not be saying that? And really getting them to think. It's also about the values. What are the values? What does it mean to be trustworthy? What does it mean to say truth? What does it mean to not give false information? And understanding the concept of empathy. This, I think, has to start much earlier than sometimes we think. We start in our context, we start with year 1s, we do a lot with year 2s, and then 3, 4, 5, and 6, you really can dig into this. And they are super responsive. They're living this. They see it. They breathe it. So they're really actually quite appreciative that you're giving them some strategies. So that's hopefully a long-winded way to answer your question.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, and some great sources or resources that you've dropped in there as well. I really like the idea of kind of bringing that down to a level of them thinking actually they're using Alexa, and why is Alexa actually kind of always saying yes to their responses. So our next question then is for John Dolman. So many young people get their news primarily from platforms like TikTok, YouTube, and X. How do you teach them to navigate these sources critically without dismissing them outright?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question because we know that. I mean, if you even look at the adult population, I'm sure that figure's been bounced around. 60% of Americans get their news from social media as opposed to from mainstream. I think that would probably be echoed across the world. I think the first thing is be balanced. Whatever you do, don't go, don't, or no. I teach teenagers, and the worst thing you can do with a teenager is say, don't do that, because that's like it's like putting a big red button on the wall saying, don't push me, because the first thing you're going to do is run over them. You have to acknowledge that they're working in that environment. You have to acknowledge that and show them. And there's a fantastic documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma, which was a which was done, it's a docudrama and it shows people who worked in these big companies and talks about the algorithm. I think going back to what John was saying, you have to unpack the what's going on behind it. And I think we have to tackle some of those more difficult, complex issues, some of that technical stuff, because that helps students get on the inside of it. And I think it comes down to just teaching good critical thinking and good literacy. So that has to be the foundation throughout the curriculum, that good critical thinking, that good literacy. And again, I think John's covered most of what I'm going to say. It's who benefits. So showing them this and getting them to think critically about, okay, why would someone set up a platform like this? Why do we want to have that constant level of engagement? Just getting them to ask that question, why, who benefits? That triangulation point is amazing. It's a really good thing to do, and I think it's a skill that we have to teach children. Um, I'm thinking back to a year eight lesson that I did, just some simple research in an English classroom with a year eight class, and the first thing they did was they were all giving me the same answer. We were talking about we were actually just looking at kind of the psychology of a character, and we were just doing some psychological research, and the students all came with the same answer because it was the first line on Google. And at this point, it revealed that the students didn't understand how the algorithm behind Google worked, and that your first page is adverts, basically, paid for, sponsored. I said it's not as though that isn't wrong. What we need to do is can we find at least two other sources that back this up? And we could, so it proved that even though it was the first one, it was still reliable. But that can't always be the case. So I think that's it. You have to be balanced, show, don't tell. And if you've got a source like, I can't recommend it highly enough, but the social dilemma is a great one for getting under the skin of that. But for pity's sake, don't alienate your audience.
Yeah, it's so critical. I really feel you kind of that taking that approach with teenagers and saying, don't do this. It really is an immediate kind of flag, isn't it? Like, well, I'm not going to listen to you. That's exactly what I'm going to do. So yeah, and some really kind of thoughtful suggestions of how to start having those conversations with students. John Micton, we're going to come back over to you and ask you, so what are some age-appropriate ways to introduce complex concepts such as disinformation, bias, algorithmic influence to students?
Thank you. I just want to note the Center for Humane Technology is the organization that the two creators of Social Dilemma that John just mentioned, which is an outstanding resource. Thank you for bringing that up. Is a great website, and they have a YouTube podcast called Your Undivided Attention. So just something to consider. So a great question. So one thing is with the little kids, we talk about lying. Why do we lie? And what does a lie look like? And why might you lie? And what happens when you find out something is a lie? So that's kind of a very concrete thing. And that's kind of the idea of fake news. I'm saying fake news is a bit like when you lie to your friend. With older kids, I'm really working with the idea of friendship and what does it feel like to have a friend and why do you have friends and what are the dispositions of a friend? And then we look at a chatbot and what does a chatbot have and why might that be a good friend and what does a chatbot not have that a friend does and vice versa. So really making it quite concrete is, these examples and also I often ask kids to mention their however much we think kids under 13 are not on YouTube or Netflix, they are. And so we talk about their algorithm. We say, oh, you're a big fan of, I don't know, Roblox. What are you noticing the other YouTube videos that are in there? Or you're maybe a big fan of a sport team or Taylor Swift. And really getting them to start noticing that the algorithm is always giving them the same videos. And I ask them to take a screenshot of that. Also, we talk a lot about what do you notice first? Getting them to start thinking and asking those questions. Why might not this? Why? And really getting them to start thinking about that and allow them to interpret it within different activities. We look at headlines. I think looking at headlines is really important. So what we do is, if you click on the headline and there's a tagline and you click on the text, are you noticing anything different? Is what on the headline actually what in the text? So being as concrete and explicit as possible. And then having them create a fake news story or having them create a fake video or creating a social media post where they're highlighting something about AI. Always, I find if kids can create content, and be it with iPads or whatever technology you have, or even posters, or they always seem to be able then to make those more intrinsic connections with their learning.
Thank you. Some great suggestions there as well. I think previously I was looking at uh, how we were going to publicize this event and thinking about some kind of some fake news headlines that we could come up with that potentially we could get out there. And it's incredible that kind of giving that activity over to the students. I imagine that they absolutely loved that, and that would be really engaging for them. And so building on that, Christopher Blackwood is also then a primary educator, and we wanted to talk about not leaving this conversation just to secondary, which I think is what can happen in many schools, is that this feels like it's an issue for secondary schools. This feels like it's an issue for older students. However, we know that we need to start this conversation earlier on. So, Chris, I want to ask you, how can schools effectively introduce digital and media literacy at a primary level so that they're more prepared and aware at a younger age?
So I think it's really important that we do prepare children from as young as possible to identify what's real and what isn't real online. Approach that I currently take with the students that I teach. We teach it through online safety lessons, where we cover different areas of real news and fake news, and we do it through lots of fun and engaging activities. So the children will potentially do role play activities, where they'll come up with fake news headlines, and then get the other children to identify why that headline is fake. So one that the children recently came up with was, for example, Ronaldo scored 100 goals for Barcelona, and the children were then able to identify why that headline could potentially be misleading. Ronaldo hasn't played for Barcelona. He wouldn't have scored 100 goals because he's currently playing in Saudi. So giving those children those skills to think critically about everything they see and that they come across. So we would start our approach to this from lower key stage 2, just giving children that skill set to be able to navigate a digital world, and yeah, just be able to prepare them for a world they're going to go into, and when they do go over to secondary school, they are then able to have some sort of awareness when they do come to that stage when they're going to be social media users, that they can identify what is real online and what isn't real online. So we try and prepare our students from as young as possible through our online safety lessons and through assemblies, and then also through having conversations with parents. So we will have parents will come into hold parents meetings and conferences where parents come into our school, and then we will try to educate our parents on keeping children safe online. I think it's having that consistent approach from at school and at home, whereas we're trying to educate the children and it's also coming from at home as well, because I feel like if parents aren't aware of the issues surrounding children's online presence, they might be unaware of what's happening. So just trying to create that education for students and parents and the whole of your school community as well.
Yeah, I think that's really key. And I think we spoke about that previously, about trying to have that kind of consistent approach then that's happening within schools, and then that parents are able to kind of mirror that back to make sure that we're supporting students the best that we can. Are there any other thoughts about how we kind of best engage parents in this conversation?
I think so. We've had a parent workshop recently, and what we try to do is just make parents aware of the dangers of misleading news online or fake news online, and how it can easily influence people. So trying to get parents to understand that the potential risks of the current of different content online, and trying to get them involved in it as much as possible, trying to educate parents. And one thing that we're potentially going to go down the road of is starting an online newsletter as well. Just keep on educating parents on ways to stay safe, and keeping the children safe online as well. Because I feel like we're living in a world with, especially with AI, and technology is quickly improving and everything's quickly changing. So I think it's just trying to engage parents and regularly educate and update them with the current content of what's happening on social media.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Chris. So we're going to jump into our next question. And this question then is for Elliot. And we've had a couple of questions pop up in the chat as well. So we hope we might have some time for these. And we'll see how we do with time. So Elliot, what are the psychological and emotional effects of exposure to misinformation and deepfakes on young people? How can schools create safe spaces to address the confusion or anxiety that they might experience?
Yeah. So I'll divide this into two parts: the psychological and emotional effects, and then what schools can do. But basically, on the psychological and emotional front, I will start by saying that I'm not a psychologist. I am going to be relaying what our psychology team have talked about, plus what we're seeing in schools. There are obviously many, many, many ways that this is coming out. I want to focus on two. The first is anxiety. That's probably the most common one that schools are seeing on the front lines. We're seeing chronic stress and almost unfounded fear be a daily part of students' lives now that wasn't there before because of the rise in misinformation or fake news or things that are being shown to them on a daily basis. So what is an example of that? An example of that we've seen is that one area might be obsessiveness over health and diet. So what's an example of that? We're now seeing kids as young as 10, 11, and 12 become obsessed with nightly skincare routines. This is an enormous thing on TikTok at the moment. It's an enormous thing on social media. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen this. But we're seeing kids as young as 11 doing 20, 30, 40-minute skincare routines in the evening, buying products or asking parents for products that are extremely expensive, thinking that they need to maintain their skin now for the future and the rest of their life. Another trend on TikTok and social media that is quite large at the moment is this idea of germs. Make sure you de-germ before you enter the house. It's important to remove germs. Research that suggests what did we think was going to happen to a generation of kids that went through the pandemic and heard about viruses and germs for so long. But this is another thing online where kids are seeing clips and information about you don't know what you're taking into your bed. Are you clean before you get in there at night? What's living in there? And it is creating this fear and stress that is really challenging for students. The other emotional impact we're seeing is just an erosion of trust. I think someone wrote this in the comments earlier, which I thought was a brilliant point about this idea of who is the source of truth anymore. That really is becoming quite challenging for students. Even when I was at school, which was sort of the 90s and the 2000s, what my teacher said was true. What my mum said was true. What my older siblings said was true. That's no longer the case anymore, because you've got one of these on your hand that you can actually fact check everything and show 17 sources that say something different. So that erosion of trust is probably the other major impact: anxiety and erosion of trust. What can schools do? I think what Christopher said was spot on. It's got to be media literacy really being at the forefront of what schools are doing. This needs to have time in the school curriculum. And I think the examples about the Ronaldo scoring 100 goals for Barcelona is exactly what I want to come on to in a moment. But if I could almost change the framing of this, when I was growing up, there was relentless education about drugs, alcohol, obesity, fast food. I got that all the time because that was the issue of the day. I still don't see in schools this issue of media literacy and digital education anywhere near the level of what sort of drugs, alcohol, diet had when I was at school. And when you actually start to consider that the average amount of time that a teenager is spending on their phone at the moment is 6 to 7 hours a day, the level of emphasis that we are putting on this issue versus this issue are completely at odds with each other. We need to really lift this issue because it is a daily, almost by the minute issue that is happening all the time. At least with fast food, you could control what kids eat. There were 3 meals a day. These kids are on their phone 6-7 hours a day now. So I think that really that dynamic in the school needs to shift. And then what to do in those spaces, it's got to be critical thinking activities. It can't be theory. It can't be warnings. It can't be, hey, make sure you're trying to do this. What Christopher said in that example is perfect. Here's an example. Why is it wrong? What are the telltale signs? What are you doing to fact check? How are you starting to understand what is real and isn't real? Similar to the example I gave in that lesson a little bit earlier about the example. So they're probably the things that schools can and should be doing. And in those areas, I think, to go back to John said, I think some sort of CPD is important for schools so that they know how to handle those conversations, to say to students that it's okay to get tricked. This stuff is really, really high quality. Like, it is hard to spot, even for experts. Like, that's why it becomes ever more important that we learn and we upskill and we train and we think critically. That's probably my answer to that question.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, there was a lot in there. I think I would like to, because we've got about 10 minutes, I would, before we jump into our next question, I'd really kind of like to explore that a little bit more and think about the impact of deepfakes and how we can introduce those conversations and support students around that. Has anybody got any other thoughts around that as well? Yes, please, John.
Again, I think all the panelists have introduced the idea of you need to give those examples out to students. And I think flipping it again, John touched on this. As a media teacher, one of the things that I'm working with, we're using Canva for AI. I'm currently doing a project where students are creating an artifact for a pre-existing computer game series, just to get them to dive in. I prefer to construct knowledge rather than just give it. So they're diving through this, but they're creating their own artifacts and showing them how easy it is to create something that convincingly looks like it belongs in the real world is a really powerful way to do it. But getting students to do the thing so that they can see how easy it is to have it done to them, I think is a really good way.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, Elliot, as well, I was really nodding along when you were kind of talking about that, those skin routines that you see young people kind of taking part in, and that's something that I've seen a lot and feel the pressure of myself as an adult, seeing all of these kind of this algorithm of you should be doing this, you should be doing that, and you imagine as a young person how pressurizing that is. So it's a really good point to make also. Okay, we're going to jump into our last question, and then we've got a couple of questions also in the chat that we might be able to just touch on as well. So this question is for John Dolman. So given that effective media literacy education extends beyond the English classroom, how can schools more effectively embed it across the wider curriculum? So what strategies can support a more cohesive interdisciplinary approach to teaching media literacy?
Well, I think it's an interesting thing you say, stretches beyond the English classroom. I don't even think it's in the English classroom very much anymore. Certainly in the UK system, it's been winnowed away. And I think that problem is it has to start with policy. I think as we have to pressurize school leaders as leaders in our own schools as well. We have to make this a policy. We have to do what I think all the panelists have said, make that time across the curriculum. Without that, this is going to be very piecemeal and it's not going to be cohesive. So the first thing is there needs to be a policy. It needs to be worked into schools. We need to recognize and what Elliot said really kind of hit home to me about I know how much time the kids are spending. I regularly survey the amount of time they spend on their phones and highlighting that and saying, well, if this is the size of the issue, then the size of our response needs to be proportionate. We have to start there. I mean, particularly we suffer from the issue of siloing. So again, going back to what John was saying and bringing people together in CPD to show them what this is, how powerful this issue is, how deep it is. All the subjects have expertise. All subjects have things that they teach that will be directly relevant. If you think about history and source verification, if you think about the scientific method and testing the validity of a hypothesis, these are all things that can contribute to critical media literacy. It's the same thinking framework. These are the skills that we need. And it's bringing staff together to exchange that knowledge that we know that we have these skills and then coming up with a framework together. It has to be, however, part of a strategy, but collaboration has got to be the key thing. And like I say, humanities, I think we're seeing a resurgence of the humanities because of those skills of critical thinking that they have. And for me, the other thing is project-based learning. Project-based learning forces interdisciplinary um, activities. It forces people to get out of their subject silos, which is something I think primary works very differently because teachers aren't quite so siloed within their subjects and they tend to work across subjects more frequently. By the time we come to secondary, we start putting knowledge into tiny boxes, less so with the IB curriculum. And I think that's a really good way to do it. So it has to start with policy, training, and bringing people together to work on this solution together. And just coming back to Elliot and Wellio, having a structure that you can follow where we can click through these learning goals, where we have something that is constructed, I think is a really powerful thing to have. It's really heartening to see products like that available that actually allow us to coordinate all of this. But again, this is going to have to be something that starts at the top and works its way down and brings people together.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. And I really agree that it does need to be that whole school approach, and it's thinking about how can you create spaces to kind of to ensure that those cross-curricular links are happening, that this is a unified approach, that it's kind of considered in all subjects. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing, John. Were there any other thoughts that somebody wanted to kind of raise before we jump into? We've got one additional question we were going to ask from the chat. Is there any other things that anybody wanted to raise first?
No, but there is a question from Lucy Mail here that I'd love to dive into if there is time, but no, otherwise no.
Yes, that's where I was going to go. John, were you just going to add something as well?
I just think one thing, there's a wonderful quote by an author that says, we ask the wrong questions. We shouldn't be asking when is it appropriate for a child to have a digital device. We should be asking the question, when is it appropriate for an adult to have a digital device in front of a child? And I think sometimes we need to also think about what is our role as adults, because kids watch what we do and our habits. If a kid's on a phone 6 hours a day, chances are there's a parent that's on the phone even more. So just a reminder that as adults, we really mentor and model the behaviors. And if we wonder sometimes why are kids behaving like that, well, it's also because what they see around them. And so there is some responsibility on the side of adults too.
Yeah, thank you, John, for sharing. We did an event recently where we really talked about the impact of social media use and trying to reduce mobile phone use. But again, you are so right to say that we need to look at parents and we need to look at adults who are actually saying, you don't do this, but I'm actually addicted to my phone and I need my phone because I need to do it for this, and this. So no, a really good point to raise. So we're just going to jump into, we had one question in the chat that we've got time for before we finish up today. So this was from Lucy Mail, who asked us what age group would be most appropriate to educate students around the ramifications of creating deepfakes, which cause massive harm and often are hard to get down when they are on the internet. The possible legal implications and records against the student that might affect applications to FE and HE. We teach ethical practice and respect in our mission. However, technology and students are way ahead with access to damaging AI software and deepfakes that can be used. And I know we've talked previously about, I know that Snapchat actually has a function now where students can create deep fakes within it. So yeah, the technology is moving so much more quickly than we can kind of catch up and talk about. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I this was the question that I'd gone to most quickly. I'll be brief so others can join in. But I think the second part is so true that students are racing ahead. They are miles ahead of what we often think they are. Just to deal with the part about, okay, when is the appropriate age? Honestly, my opinion on this is as soon as possible. You teach students, to go back to my example before, you teach students about bullying and healthy eating and the importance of exercise from the age of 5 years old. Why not teach them this from the exact same age? Now, you'd scale it and you'd make it appropriate and you'd move it through. But I genuinely see the importance of this and learning digital literacy as the exact same level of importance as what you're putting in your mouth every single day in your body, because what you're putting in your body and having exercise is critical to your health and well-being, so too is understanding this. This technology that we've got isn't going away. It's only going to augment. Who knows what happens over the lifetime of a child that is 5 and 6 and 7 years old now when we see what's happened in the last 10 years alone. So my perspective on this would be as soon as possible. For the legal ramifications, it's difficult to say depending on different jurisdictions and where people are in the world, but essentially the implications of posting and it being there forever is definitely something that should be addressed quite early on. They're my 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, John.
Again, I'm just going to agree, the sooner the better. I think completely with you on that.
Yeah, and John.
I think sometimes we misunderstand how soon kids are exposed to these things and how many of them often in an unsupervised environment, if they have an iPad at home or even cell phones or even a computer, often they're going to these spaces without parents knowing. So they're already building some understandings and concepts around that. So I definitely agree with Elliot and John that, it's never, even with kindergartners, there's a lot you can start with.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I think I heard something recently about if as soon as a child has an iPhone, or a smartphone, you can definitely kind of expect them to be looking at things and seeing things that potentially we wouldn't want them to see at that age. And so having these conversations before that and being aware of that is so important. Thank you, everyone. I think that we're having lots of people join us now because we might have had an email that went out over a timed exit rather than at the actual dedicated time. However, this is all recorded and we'll make sure that the recording goes out to everybody who registered and everyone then who has then watched that recording can access the certificate link also and all of the materials that have been shared. And so Welly have released some materials to share here as well, some fantastic materials. So I'm just going to drop the certificate link in here. And again, if you haven't registered for your ISN membership, it's completely free to register for ISN. So you can go online and find us. The link is in here. I'll drop it in also. So as soon as you've registered for ISN as well, you can access all of our previous discussions. You can become involved in discussions in the future, and you'll be able then to register for your certificate. But thank you everyone for joining us today. Unfortunately, we're just at the end of our time, but do look for these people on LinkedIn as well. I know that each have kind of different materials to share, so blogs, podcasts and things that you can catch up with, and there's lots of resources that have been shared, so we'll make sure that those go out to everybody. Thank you everyone.